Topic 11. International processes. The purpose of the seminar, to get acquainted with the concepts and types of international political processes and international cooperation, to analyze the main traditions in the study of international conflicts and the theory of international integration. The main provisions of the 1. Conflicts and cooperation are among the most important characteristics of international relations, considered as a process, and represent inextricably linked aspects of the interaction of their participants. In the language of V. Hegel and K. Marx, they are a dialectical pair, that is, mutually presupposing and mutually conditioning each other opposites that can change places. This means that the processes of international cooperation always include a conflict dimension, and vice versa. Every conflict involves a certain share of cooperation of its participants. 2. In the scientific literature, there is a variety of approaches to the study of international conflicts. 3. Another point of view is held by J.R.R. Tolkien Burton, according to whom the conflict is mainly subjective in nature. 4. The methodological basis of domestic studies of international conflict is most often the position of dialectical philosophy that conflict is an extreme form of aggravation of contradiction. 5. There is a widespread perception of the destructive and destabilizing function of conflict in public relations and the need to avoid, prevent or suppress it. 6. The typology of conflicts is as diverse as their definitions are diverse and also depends on the angle of view, the goals of analysis, etc. Conflicts between individuals, groups or states are considered, respectively, as interpersonal, intergroup and international, interstate. 7. The concept of conflict is sometimes considered as a synonym of the concept of crisis, but in international political science, a crisis refers to a national or international situation in which there is a threat to the primary values, interests or goals of an actor. 9. Thus, the relative independence of the crisis in the conflict-crisis bundle, as well as the relationship of these two elements, can be characterized by the following distinctive features. 10. According to some researchers, during the Cold War era, international crises unfolded in the shadow of terror. They either opposed two nuclear superpowers or threatened non-nuclear countries. 11. On the other hand, in the Third World, the crises represented loyally challenging to control or settlement. 12. Unlike domestic conflicts which are resolved through the jurisdiction of the state, the conflicts and crises in international relations mostly can't be solved by the application of international law considering its features. 13. Since the Second World War, another method of resolving international conflicts, the method of reconciliation, has been known. 14. The emergence and development of universal intergovernmental organizations, primarily the Union, made it possible to move forward in the settlement of interstate conflicts in two directions. 15. There are three main directions in the study of international conflicts: strategic studies, conflict studies, peace studies. 16. The analysis of international conflicts from the standpoint of strategic research is aimed at solving practical problems and is associated with ensuring national interests and state security, with creating favorable
17.
conditions for victory.
One of the priority problems of strategic research is the problem of war, its causes and consequences for a particular state, region and the international interstate system as a whole. Previously, war was seen as an extreme, but still normal, means of achieving political goals. 18. Central to the second area of conflict research are those issues that are not considered by strategic studies, i.e. issues related primarily to the clarification of the origin and identification of varieties of international conflicts. There are differences on each of these issues. 19. For example, J. Galtung, who proposed the structural theory of aggression, considers the cause of international conflicts to be an imbalance in the criteria for judging the place of a given state in the international system. 20. The views of the American researcher A. Organski are also close to the positions considered. Based on the theory of political equilibrium, balance of power, in the analysis of the causes of the conflict, he proceeds from the fact that violations of the structural equilibrium in the international system are explained by the appearance of challenger states in it. 21. The views prevailing in Soviet literature on the nature and origin of international conflicts can also be attributed to structural concepts. 22. Some authors see the basis for the emergence of international conflicts in the peculiarities of interaction between the interstate system and its internal environment. 23. The lack of a generally accepted definition of the structure of the international system makes it difficult to distinguish between structural and contextual
Thus,
approaches.
F. Breyer and M. R. Jalili distinguish three groups of international conflicts that differ in their nature, motivations of their participants and scale.
25.
There are many other classifications, the criteria of which are the causes and degree of tension of international conflicts, the nature and forms of their occurrence, duration and scale. 26. Within the following areas, exploring the world, we are talking about a wide range of issues related to finding ways to resolve international conflicts. 27. Proponents of the first approach pay particular attention to the analysis of issues related to conflict resolution and control mechanisms and to the search for ways to move from confrontation to cooperation on this basis. 28. One of the main conclusions of the second approach is that peace is not just the absence of war, but above all law and justice in relations between states. J. Galtung goes even further, considering that peace is not just the absence of direct violence, but also the absence of any forms of violence, including those that arise from structural compulsions. 29. The differences between the considered currents are rather conditional. This is confirmed by the close cooperation of representatives of all these trends in the study of the origin, nature and methods of conflict resolution. 30. In the analysis of international negotiations, there are attempts at a holistic, systematic approach, understanding them as a process of joint decision-making in contrast to other types of interaction, for example, consultations, discussions, which do not necessarily require joint decision-making, the desire to distinguish their separate phases in order to identify the specifics 31. Of the actions of participants. In the Cold War era, total control of the world by the two superpowers played a regulatory role in international relations. Today, nuclear weapons no longer have the same intimidating significance. 32. From all of the above, the following conclusions can be drawn. First, at the beginning of the 21st century, the causes and sources of conflict have changed. 33. Changes concern not only the causes, actors and nature of conflicts in the modern world. The mechanisms of their settlement are also changing. 34. The first is participation in military operations. 35. Peacekeeping operations play a special role. 36. The concept of international cooperation reflects a process of interaction between two or more actors, in which the use of armed violence is excluded and the joint search for the realization of common interests dominates. 37. The development of cooperation between states and other actors in international relations has given rise to a whole system of intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations of global and regional significance. 38. While noting the significant progress made in recent years in the theoretical study of international cooperation, experts highlight two of the most important achievements of the theory. 39. The existence of a consensus on the content of the concept of interstate cooperation makes it possible to create a primary classification of cooperative situations. 40. Secondly, another important achievement of recent research in the field of interstate cooperation has been the development of hypotheses about the conditions under which cooperation 41. Between states becomes Before analyzing the contribution of the sociological approach, it is worth briefly considering the features of the study of interstate cooperation within the framework of existing theoretical directions in international science. 42. The most representative study of the problem of interstate cooperation from the perspective of traditional political realism was published in 1962 by Arnold Wolfers, Differences and Cooperation. A. Wolfers identifies two main motives or incentives, and accordingly, two types of interstate cooperation, intradirectional and external directional cooperation. 43. In addition to these two main types of cooperation, A. Wolfers identifies another type that at first glance does not fit into the scheme of friendship, enmity between states. 44. The theory of international regimes emerged in the 1980s. Its supporters P. Krasner, R. Cohen, F. Kradikval, J. Raji, O. Young, etc. see the foundations and motives of interstate cooperation in institutions that are not the direct origin of international law or international organizations and are not directly related to them. 45. According to the authors of the Tübingen Group, states create international regimes by agreeing on a number of principles, norms and rules that they will follow in policy when making decisions on controversial issues. 46. Other authors note that the very existence of the regime points to a previous series of decisions taken by states for the purpose of cooperation. 47. According to H. Milner, it is noteworthy that even critics of the theory of international regimes agree with its central provisions and that there is empirical evidence for the conclusion that regimes can reduce the cost of business transactions for states negotiating cooperation agreements. 48. The theory in question arose as a result of a polemic between neorealists and neoliberals. However, the discussion itself did not make the expected contribution to the analysis of the problem of interstate cooperation, as it revealed serious internal weaknesses and limitations of both parties involved in it, neoliberalism and neoliberalism. Summing up the weaknesses of the parties involved in the discussion, Powell identifies, in a certain sense, the increase in opportunities for research on international cooperation is associated with the rapid development in recent years of the sociological direction in international political science. 50. In the context of post-international relations, interstate cooperation inevitably becomes multilateral. At the same time, multilateralism is not just the number of states participating in cooperation, but above all the diversity of subjects of cooperation, states, transnational firms, banks, financial groups, communes, ethnic groups, professional associations, etc., which have different legitimacy, different motivational interests, different rationalities and different opportunities. 51. The British School in International Political Science, which is associated with the names of M. Banks, H. Bull, J. Burton, M. White, considers interstate cooperation as a result of the historical strengthening of the international society, and the interstate regulatory structures created in it as a result of the Peace of Westphalia. 52. The theory of international society has long-standing traditions. It not only attracts new supporters, but also causes some objections. 53. The following theories in the analysis of cooperation emphasize the existence and importance of international norms as relatively independent of state efforts to create and reproduce them. 54. Constructivists are convinced that norms should be linked not to political legitimacy in their content, but to the social processes developing in international relations and to the strength of the social fabric of these relations. 55. For historical institutionalists, cooperation is the result of historical, social and political factors, both international and domestic. 56. As for the representatives of the French School of Sociology of International Relations, from their point of view, the study of the changes that occur in the interaction of states and new participants in international relations is of fundamental importance for the analysis of state cooperation. 57. It follows from the above that the peculiarities of interstate cooperation in modern conditions cannot be properly understood if at least two fundamental circumstances are not taken into account and analyzed. 58. Recently in the literature the concept of cooperation and integration are increasingly divorced. If interstate cooperation does not go beyond the boundaries of sovereignty, the integration means a transfer 59. Of sovereignty in the part. In terms of the geographical scope of integration processes, there are global, regional and sub-regional levels of integration. 60. The main point of studying the phenomenon of international integration from the perspective of functionalism was the question of the reasons for the failure to create the League of Nations. 61. Thus, functionalism does not just propose to expand interstate cooperation in certain areas, which would become purely technical. 62. Thus, along with pragmatism, the functional approach to the study of integration processes also contains a significant share of normativity. 63. These shortcomings were partly reproduced by neo-functionalism. Its representatives C. Haas, L. Lindbergh and others defend the idea that the need for cooperation in a particular sector of economic, social or cultural activities can cause a chain reaction effect in other areas. 64. If functionalism, while attaching great importance to political institutions, considers them to be derivatives or parallel to economic, social and other processes, federalism makes them the center of its concept. 65. The concept of federalism, which at first seemed illusory, slowly overcoming contradictions, but still convincingly acquires visible features in the integration process in Western Europe. 66. From the very beginning, however, federalism was not the conceptual basis for European integration. 67. It is the complex study that is discussed in the pluralistic concept of K. Deutsch. So, among the most essential characteristics of international relations, considered as a process, conflicts and cooperation are inextricably linked aspects of the interaction of their participants.